the most remarkable narrative ever told does not commence with "once upon a time," but with "in the beginning." This is a journey from chaos to order, from darkness to light, an epic that has shaped civilizations and continues to resonate in our modern world. The Old Testament transcends mere religious documentation. It presents the grand drama of humanity's search for meaning, populated by unexpected heroes, formidable antagonists, and astonishing divine interventions. The story begins at the most fundamental moment in history, the very origin of existence. Genesis 1 verse 1 declares that, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Before this moment, only God existed, eternal, without beginning or end. Through a deliberate act of divine will, He brought everything we know into existence. The biblical narrative describes that initially, the earth was formless and empty, with darkness covering the deep, while the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. In this primordial scene, God spoke, "Let there be light." This established a pattern that would continue throughout creation. God speaks, matter obeys, and the Creator declares His work good. The 6 days of creation unfolded in careful sequence. Day 1, light was created and separated from darkness. Day 2, God separated the waters, creating an expanse called sky, the atmosphere surrounding our planet. Day 3, 2 significant acts occurred. First, God gathered the waters below the sky, allowing dry land to appear. Then He commanded the earth to produce vegetation, with reproductive capability embedded from the beginning. Day 4, celestial bodies were created to provide illumination and mark time and seasons. Day 5, God filled the waters and skies with living creatures, blessing them to multiply. Day 6, first witnessed the creation of land animals, and as its crowning work, the creation of humanity. Day 7, God rested, not from exhaustion, but to establish a pattern that would become the foundation for the Sabbath, a day set apart for rest and worship. The formation of human beings is described in unique detail. Unlike everything that came before, humans were created in the very image and likeness of God Himself. Genesis 1 verses 26 to 27 records, "Then God said, Let us make men in our image, after our likeness." So God created men in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female He created them. 2 fundamental aspects emerge here. First, the use of the plural, "let us make," suggests deliberation within the Godhead. Second, there is clear affirmation that both man and woman equally bear the divine image. This image grants humanity intrinsic value and dignity, along with unique capabilities. Genesis 2 provides further details. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. This description evokes the image of a potter carefully shaping his creation. What animated this form was not merely a verbal command, but an intimate act, the very breath of God imparting life. For the first man, God prepared a special dwelling place, a garden in Eden, a location of beauty, abundance, and provision. In this garden, humanity received its primary vocation, to cultivate and keep it. Work was not a punishment but part of the original design. Man was made for productive activity and responsible stewardship over creation. Along with this privilege came a clear instruction regarding the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This single restriction amid so much freedom established moral choice as a fundamental element of human experience. Yet something was still missing. God observed, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a suitable helper for him." After bringing all the animals before the man to be named, God provided the solution, creating woman from the man's rib. Adam's response reveals the depth of this bond. "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." This first poem in history celebrates the complementarity and unity between man and woman. What was life like in this perfect garden before sin entered? The Bible gives glimpses of an existence marked by harmony on multiple levels. Relationship with God, characterized by closeness and intimacy. Genesis references God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, suggesting regular and tangible divine presence. There were no spiritual barriers, communion was direct and natural. Between man and woman, complete transparency existed. Genesis 2 verse 25 states, "Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame." This shameless nakedness represents a relationship without barriers, without emotional hiding, without the need for social masks. With the environment, responsible stewardship, not exploitation or struggle. Work in the garden was neither toilsome nor frustrating, but fulfilling and productive. The earth responded generously to the care of its stewards. Death and scarcity. Death had not yet entered the world as a universal reality. Existence was marked by abundance, not scarcity. There was no need for competition over resources or anxiety about future provisions. At the same time, this was not an existence without purpose. Humans had meaningful work, clear responsibilities, and the necessity of making moral choices. The presence of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil represented a clear boundary, a reminder that though made in God's image, humans were not gods. The tree of life, also present in the garden, suggests that physical immortality was accessible to the first humans. Death was a potential threat, but not an inevitable reality. In this paradise-like setting, the first couple enjoyed shalom, the comprehensive peace that encompasses physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual well-being. This was God's original design for human life on earth. However, Eden's perfect harmony would not last forever. Genesis 3 introduces a new character, the serpent, described as more cunning than any wild animal. The tempter's strategy began with a subtle distortion of God's word, turning his generous permission into what appeared to be a petty restriction. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? The woman responded by partially correcting the distortion, but already showed signs of negative influence by adding to the prohibition and diminishing the certainty of consequences. The serpent then moved to direct contradiction. "You will certainly not die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This accusation suggested that God was deliberately withholding something beneficial from humans for selfish reasons. The text then describes the internal process of temptation. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Three aspects of the fruit's appeal emerge: physical, aesthetic, and intellectual. The decision to eat represented more than mere disobedience. It was a declaration of spiritual independence, a rejection of divine authority, an attempt to establish moral autonomy. A significant detail is Adam's passive presence. Apparently, he was present during the serpent's dialogue but did not intervene. He failed in his role as guardian and then consciously participated in the transgression. The fall was immediate. Right after eating the fruit, the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. The knowledge they gained did not bring liberating enlightenment, but rather an awareness of vulnerability and shame. The first action after the fall, covering themselves with fig leaves, symbolizes all subsequent human attempts to hide shame and project an image of self-sufficiency that masks inner brokenness. The repercussions of disobedience were immediate and far-reaching. First spiritual consequence: when they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden, they hid from him among the trees. The relationship once marked by open communion was now characterized by fear and hiding. God's dialogue: God initiated a question, "Where are you?" This question was meant to provoke confession and self-awareness. Instead, it was met with evasion and blame-shifting. Adam implicitly blamed both the woman and God. "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." The woman in turn shifted blame to the serpent. Specific judgments: God pronounced specific judgments for each participant. For the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This first promise of redemption foretells a decisive defeat of evil, though at a cost to the human victor. For the woman, consequences involve pain in childbirth and tension in the marital relationship. For the man, work would become arduous, the ground resistant to his efforts, and death would be his inevitable fate. Divine mercy: even amid judgment, mercy remained active. God provided garments of skin to cover the couple's nakedness, suggesting the first animal sacrifice to cover human shame. Expulsion from the garden, not merely as punishment, but also as mercy, preventing access to the tree of life meant avoiding the dreadful possibility of immortality in a state of perpetual sin. The garden, now guarded by cherubim, would remain in humanity's collective memory as a symbol of lost paradise and the need for restoration that could only come through divine initiative. Underscore 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 underscore. Outside the garden, the story of humanity began to unfold with the birth of the first children, Cain and Abel. These first brothers represent two fundamental ways of human subsistence, different vocations, yet equally legitimate. The narrative quickly shifts to an act of worship. Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground, while Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. The text does not explicitly explain why Abel's offering was accepted while Cain's was rejected, though possible reasons include the superior quality of Abel's offering, the internal attitude of the worshippers, or the nature of the sacrifice itself. Cain's reaction reveals his character, so Cain was very angry, and his face fell. God approached him with counsel and a warning, revealing fundamental truths about the nature of sin, its threatening proximity, its almost personal aggressiveness, and humanity's responsibility to resist it. Tragically, Cain rejected this counsel and killed his brother Abel. The first human death was not natural, but a premeditated murder, brother against brother. God's response was immediate: "Where is Abel, your brother?" Once again, just as with Adam in the garden, God begins with a question to which he already knows the answer. And once again, he is met with evasion: "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The judgment was pronounced with a powerful image: "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." The earth, already cursed after the fall, now becomes even more hostile to Cain. The farmer who spilled blood upon the soil would find only barrenness under his hands. Surprisingly, God responded to Cain's concern with a measure of protection, putting a mark on him. This act of mercy toward an unrepentant murderer demonstrates the complexity of divine justice. Even in judgment, God limits violence and preserves life. Cain departed from the divine presence and settled in the land of Nod, whose name means wandering, reflecting his status as a fugitive. Despite the curse upon the land, Cain managed to establish himself, marry, and have descendants. He built a city, the first mention of urban construction in the Bible, marking the beginning of human civilization. Cain's descendants developed the first technologies and arts: nomadic herding with Jabal, music with Jubal, and metallurgy with Tubal-Cain. Though separated from God's presence, Cain's lineage demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and cultural creativity, a reflection of the image of God that remained in them despite sin. However, alongside material progress came moral deterioration. Lamech, a fifth-generation descendant of Cain, introduced polygamy and composed a song of the sword revealing a spirit of disproportionate vengeance and glorification of violence. What had been an isolated terrible act in Cain became a philosophy of life in Lamech. The divine protection given to Cain as an act of mercy was perversely transformed into an incentive for further violence. In contrast to this lineage, the narrative introduces another genealogy. Eve bore a son and called his name Seth, meaning appointed or substituted, marking him as Abel's spiritual successor. The contrast between the two lineages is highlighted. While Cain's descendants developed technology, arts, and cities, Seth's descendants cultivated systematic worship. This spiritual division between the lineages would set the pattern for subsequent human history. Genesis 5 presents a surprising genealogy from Adam to Noah, notable for the extraordinary lifespans recorded. The pre-flood patriarchs lived an average of over 900 years. This longevity could reflect different physical conditions in the pre-flood world, greater temporal proximity to the original perfection of creation, or divine purpose in establishing the human race. The repeated phrase, lived and died, serves as a constant reminder of the reality of death introduced by the fall. Even with extraordinarily long lifespans, the sentence of mortality remained in effect. One character stands out as an exception to this pattern: Enoch. Unlike everyone else on the list, Enoch did not die. He was translated, taken directly into the divine presence. What set Enoch apart was his walk with God. This intimacy with the Creator, this alignment of wills and purposes, marks Enoch as an extraordinary example of faithfulness in an era of increasing corruption. Another notable patriarch is Methuselah, Enoch's son, whose name possibly means, when he dies, it will come, potentially a prophecy, as the year of his death coincides with the year of the flood. His extraordinary lifespan, 969 years, symbolizes divine patience, extending the opportunity for repentance to the utmost before global judgment. As the human population multiplied, so did wickedness exponentially. Genesis 6 introduces one of the most enigmatic episodes in the Bible, the sons of God taking wives from the daughters of men. The identity of these figures has been debated for centuries, but regardless of the specific interpretation, the result was catastrophic. The Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth and that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. This description reveals not just external acts of violence or injustice, but a corruption of human intentionality itself, thoughts, desires, and motivations perverted at their core. The divine response was profound sorrow, so the Lord regretted that he had made men on the earth, and he was deeply grieved. This divine regret does not indicate a change of mind due to error, but rather deep emotional pain over the perversion of his beloved creation. The resulting divine decision was equally severe: I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth. The judgment would include not only the guilty humans but the entire creation entrusted to their care, a reflection of the interconnectedness established from the beginning between humanity and nature. Amidst this scene of universal corruption, a single ray of hope emerges, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This grace, unmerited favor, would be the foundation for the preservation of the human race. Noah is described as a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries, who walked with God. This description does not suggest moral perfection, but relative integrity in a world universally corrupted. Noah maintained a connection with the Creator and lived according to his principles. God revealed to Noah his plan for judgment and salvation: make yourself an ark of gopher wood. The instructions for building the ark were meticulously specific: dimensions of 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 high, with 3 decks, a side door, and a window. This massive construction project on dry land must have seemed like madness to Noah's contemporaries. Peter later referred to Noah as a preacher of righteousness, suggesting that the long years of construction were accompanied by warnings about the coming judgment and calls for repentance, warnings that were universally ignored. Along with the construction instructions, God established a covenant with Noah: I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. This first explicit mention of a divine covenant in the Bible sets the pattern for future covenantal relationships: divine initiative, human obedience, specific promises, and preservation amid judgment. When the construction was completed and the animals were gathered, God gave the final command. Noah's family entered the ark 7 days before the rain began, a final period of waiting and preparation before the catastrophe. Then came the flood. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The description suggests not only extraordinary rainfall but also tectonic upheaval, releasing underground waters, a geological reshaping of the earth. The waters rose for 150 days, covering even the highest mountains. All terrestrial life that breathed outside the ark perished, a universal judgment against universal corruption. But amidst this devastation, a word of hope remains: then God remembered Noah. The verb remember does not imply that God had temporarily forgotten, but rather signifies special attention and action in favor of the object of his remembrance. The gradual recession of the waters, the ark landing on the mountains of Ararat, the release of birds to test the conditions, and finally the drying of the earth, all this took more than a year. When the time finally came to leave, Noah's first action demonstrated his devotion. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord. Before building a house for his family, Noah built an altar for worship. This sacrifice acknowledged both divine mercy and the need for atonement for sin, which still persisted even in this new creation. God responded with a promise: I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. God then formally established a covenant, with the rainbow as its sign, a visual symbol of the divine promise that each new generation could see and remember. The Noahic covenant included new instructions: the reaffirmation of the mission to populate the earth, permission to eat meat with the restriction against consuming blood, and the first explicit law regarding homicide: based on the principle that humanity bears the image of God. Even Noah, a righteous man who walked with God, was not immune to failure. After the flood, he planted a vineyard, drank wine, became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. This episode illustrates how even heroes of faith can have moments of weakness. The response of Noah's sons reveals fundamental differences in character. Ham's attitude suggested disregard for the dignity of the patriarch, while Shem and Japheth demonstrated reverence and honor, even when their father was in a moment of weakness. When Noah learned of what had happened, his response was prophetic. Curiously, the curse fell upon Canaan, the son of Ham, possibly anticipating the character of the future Canaanites. This prophetic declaration would be fulfilled over generations when the Canaanites were subdued by the Israelites. The blessings upon Shem and Japheth also had significant implications. The reference to the Lord, the God of Shem, anticipates the special role of the Semites in divine revelation, while the blessing upon Japheth foresees the geographical expansion of his descendants. Genesis 10 presents a systematic record of humanity's dispersion after the flood. This catalogue of Noah's descendants provides a framework for understanding the origins and relationships among the various peoples of the ancient world. The descendants of Japheth are identified with the peoples who settled north and west of Mesopotamia, in Asia Minor, the Mediterranean islands, and Europe. The descendants of Ham are primarily associated with Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, and parts of the Middle East, including Canaan. The text gives special attention to Nimrod, described as a mighty hunter and the founder of major cities in Mesopotamia. The descendants of Shem are catalogued with emphasis on Eber, possibly the origin of the term Hebrews, and the ancestors of the Aramaic and Arab tribes. This table of nations establishes the fundamental unity of the human race, all descending from Noah and ultimately from Adam. It places Israel within the broader context of the nations, provides a framework for understanding Israel's interactions with neighboring peoples, establishes the legitimacy of future Israelite conquests, and sets the stage for the calling of Abraham. While Genesis 10 provides an overview of human dispersion, Genesis 11 explains how and why this dispersion occurred. The narrative begins, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech." This original linguistic unity facilitated unrestricted collaboration among all peoples. A significant group migrated eastward and settled in the plain of Shinar, Mesopotamia. There, their unity became the catalyst for an ambitious project. "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This project revealed problematic motivations. The tower, whose top reaches the heavens, suggests not only technological ambition but possibly an attempt to attain divine status. The determination to make a name for ourselves reflects collective pride. Most revealing is the motivation, lest we be scattered, a direct rejection of the divine command to fill the earth. The divine response is described in almost ironic terms. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men were building. The image of God coming down to examine what humans considered their greatest achievement highlights the disparity between human ambition and divine reality. God's judgment expressed concern about the implications of a unified humanity in rebellion. Indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. This is only the beginning. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. The intervention aimed to limit the potential for coordinated evil. "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech." The introduction of multiple languages created communication barriers that fragmented human society. The name of the place, Babel, confusion, came to symbolize the futility of autonomous human ambition. However, the linguistic and geographical dispersion also contained mercy, preventing the consolidation of evil on a global scale and promoting the development of distinct cultures with unique contributions. Ironically, the builder's goal, "Let us make a name for ourselves," was indeed accomplished, but as a symbol of the failure of human pride before divine sovereignty. After Babel, the narrative shifts dramatically in focus, from all of humanity to a single family. This transition is facilitated by a genealogy tracing the lineage from Shem to Terah and his sons, including Abram, later called Abraham. The genealogy establishes Abram as a direct descendant of Shem, heir to the blessing pronounced by Noah, and part of the lineage that preserves some knowledge of the true God in an increasingly idolatrous world. It is in this context, Abram already 75 years old and settled in Haran, that the divine call occurs, changing the course of redemptive history. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This calling required a threefold departure, from his land, his kindred, and his father's household, essentially asking Abram to leave behind everything that provided identity and security in the ancient world. The promises encompass three main spheres. Land, the land that I will show you. Offspring, I will make of you a great nation, a significant promise considering that Sarai was barren. Blessing, both for Abram personally and through him for all the families of the earth. This last promise is particularly notable in the post-Babel context. After humanity's dispersion, God initiated a process of reunification and restoration, not through a human project like the Tower, but through his own redemptive initiative channeled through a chosen man. Abram's response is described with simplicity, "So Abram went, as the Lord had told him." Without recording any deliberation, the text presents Abram's obedience as immediate and complete, an extraordinary act of faith. As Hebrews later comments, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. In Canaan, Abram received further confirmation. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." The land that God would show him was now identified as Canaan, the same region inhabited by the descendants of Canaan, upon whom Noah's curse had been pronounced. Abram's response was to build an altar, the first of several he would establish at key points along his journey. Upon arriving in Canaan, Abram did not settle permanently in one place, but traveled through the land, dwelling as a foreigner in the promised land, trusting in divine promises. However, soon after his arrival, Abram faced his first test, a severe famine in the land. This crisis temporarily led him out of the promised land into Egypt. Fearing for his safety, Abram asked Sarai to present herself only as his sister, a half-truth that concealed their marital relationship. As expected, Sarai's beauty attracted aristocratic attention, and she was taken into Pharaoh's household. The situation became potentially catastrophic. The mother of the promised nation was now in Pharaoh's harem. However, God intervened, inflicting serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household. After this episode, Abram returned to Canaan. When the land's limited resources created tension between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's, Abram demonstrated remarkable generosity and trust by offering Lot the first choice of territory. Lot chose the fertile plain of the Jordan, eventually settling in Sodom. Following this separation, God renewed his promise, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south and east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever." Later, Abram was drawn into a regional conflict when Mesopotamian kings attacked the cities of the plain and took Lot captive. Abram mobilized his men, rescued Lot, and recovered the plundered goods. This episode introduced Melchizedek, the mysterious king-priest of Salem, who blessed Abram and received a tithe from him. After these events, God formalized his covenant with Abram through a solemn ritual involving divided animals and a flaming torch that passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates." This ceremony sealed the divine promises with a sacred and irrevocable commitment, with God alone assuming responsibility for fulfilling the covenant. Abraham's family life revealed both his faith and his human frailties. The central challenge was the apparent impossibility of fulfilling the promise of numerous offspring, as Sarai was barren. After 10 years in Canaan with no sign of an heir, Sarai proposed a culturally common solution of the time. Abram should have a child with her Egyptian servant, Hagar. Abram accepted this proposal, and Hagar conceived. The consequences were immediate and problematic. When Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. The relationship between the two women quickly deteriorated, with Sarai treating Hagar so harshly that the servant fled into the wilderness. There, an angel of the Lord found Hagar and instructed her to return and submit to Sarai, also promising that her descendants would be too numerous to count. Hagar returned and gave birth to Ishmael when Abram was 86 years old. 13 years later, God appeared to Abram again, reaffirming his covenant and introducing significant changes. First, names were changed. Abram, exalted father, became Abraham, father of multitudes, and Sarai became Sarah, both reflecting the promise of numerous descendants. Second, circumcision was instituted as a physical sign of the covenant, to be practiced by all males in Abraham's household. Third, and most astonishingly, God specifically promised that Sarah would bear a son within the following year, despite her old age. Abraham's initial reaction was one of disbelief. He laughed and suggested that Ishmael be considered the heir. But God insisted, "Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Shortly after, 3 mysterious visitors appeared to Abraham, and one of them, identified as the Lord himself, reaffirmed the promise of a son. Sarah, listening at the entrance of the tent, also laughed in disbelief, but was gently rebuked. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" As promised, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac when Abraham was 100 years old and she was 90. The name Isaac, he laughs, immortalized the transformation of laughter from disbelief into joy. However, the arrival of the promised son created new family tensions. During Isaac's weaning feast, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking him, which led her to demand that Abraham cast out the slave woman and her son. Though painful for Abraham, this demand received divine approval, with a promise that God would also make Ishmael into a great nation. The ultimate test of Abraham's faith came when God asked the unthinkable, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." Without questioning, Abraham obeyed. He prepared for the sacrifice and was stopped at the last moment by divine intervention. This extraordinary event demonstrated both Abraham's absolute trust in God and God's rejection of human sacrifice. Instead, God provided a ram as a substitute, foreshadowing the principle of sacrificial substitution that would become central to Israelite theology. This final test resulted in the most emphatic confirmation of the covenant. "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this. I will surely bless you, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed." Abraham sought a wife for Isaac from his own relatives in Haran rather than among the Canaanites. His servant, providentially guided, found Rebekah at a local well and recognized her as God's chosen bride for Isaac. The marriage began with deep affection. He took Rebekah and she became his wife, and he loved her. Like Sarah before her, Rebekah was barren. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife, and the Lord heard his prayer, and Rebekah conceived. However, the answer to prayer came with a complication. The children struggled together within her womb. Seeking divine understanding, Rebekah received a crucial prophecy: 2 nations are in your womb. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The twins were born with contrasting characteristics. Esau, the firstborn, was red and covered with hair, while Jacob was born grasping his brother's heel. These physical differences foreshadowed differences in temperament and lifestyle. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. This contrast extended to parental favoritism. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. This division created fertile ground for future family conflicts. The first significant confrontation occurred when Esau, returning from the field exhausted, found Jacob cooking stew. Jacob took advantage of his brother's vulnerability. "Sell me your birthright now." Esau, prioritizing immediate gratification over future blessings, agreed. This reckless exchange revealed that Esau despised his birthright. Years later, when Isaac was old and blind, he decided to give his final blessing to Esau. Rebekah, overhearing this plan and remembering the divine prophecy about her sons, orchestrated a deception. She disguised Jacob as Esau, prepared food resembling Isaac's favorite game, and instructed Jacob to present himself as the firstborn. The deception worked, and Isaac bestowed upon Jacob the blessing intended for Esau. When Esau discovered the deception, his reaction was one of bitter anguish. Isaac, realizing the blessing's irreversibility, offered Esau a secondary blessing, one of struggle but eventual freedom from his brother's yoke. Esau then hated Jacob because of the blessing and vowed to kill him after Isaac's death. Aware of this threat, Rebekah arranged for Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran, ostensibly to find a wife but in reality to save his life. Thus the heir of the promise departed as a fugitive, leaving behind the comforts of home to face an uncertain future. This complex family narrative reveals how God fulfills his purposes even through human failures, parental favoritism, exploitation of weakness, deliberate deception. None of these are condoned, yet all are incorporated into the unfolding of the divine plan foretold before the twins were born. Jacob's journey to Haran was marked by a divine encounter that transformed his spiritual understanding. At Bethel, during the night, he dreamed of a ladder set up on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Above the ladder stood the Lord, who reaffirmed the Abrahamic covenant. Waking, Jacob recognized the uniqueness of the place. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He set up a memorial pillar and made a vow conditioned on divine care during his journey, a sign of emerging faith still in its early stages. Upon arriving in Haran, Jacob met Rachel, Laban's daughter, and immediately fell in love. He agreed to work 7 years to marry her, a period that seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. However, on the wedding night, Laban substituted Rachel with her older sister Leah. When Jacob discovered the deception the next morning, Laban justified himself, "It is not so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn," a significant irony considering how Jacob had supplanted his own older brother. Jacob agreed to work another 7 years for Rachel, eventually marrying both sisters. Over time, through his wives and their maidservants, Jacob had 11 sons and 1 daughter during his stay in Haran. These sons would become the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel, with Joseph later producing 2 tribes through his sons. After 20 years in Haran, Jacob decided to return to Canaan. His departure was complicated by Laban's reluctance to let him go, as he had greatly prospered through Jacob's work. Eventually, Jacob left secretly, and when Laban caught up with him, they established a non-aggression pact. Jacob's most intimidating challenge was the impending reunion with Esau, who had sworn to kill him 20 years earlier. Sending messengers ahead, Jacob received alarming news that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. In fear, Jacob divided his group into 2 camps, sent substantial gifts to appease his brother, and then spent a memorable night wrestling with a mysterious visitor. This transformative encounter resulted in a name change. "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have prevailed." This name change reflected an inner transformation, from Jacob, supplanter, to Israel, he who struggles with God, or Prince of God. The deceiver who had obtained blessings through cunning now received a blessing directly after an honest struggle. Surprisingly, the meeting with Esau was marked by reconciliation, not violence. After this emotional reunion, the brothers went their separate ways. Among Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph held a special place. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons and made him a robe of many colors. This favoritism, combined with Joseph's dreams foretelling his future authority over the family, intensified his brothers' jealousy so that they could not speak peaceably to him. Their hostility culminated when Joseph, sent by his father to check on his brothers grazing the flocks far from home, was attacked by them. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits." Reuben intervened to save Joseph's life by proposing that they throw him into a pit, intending to secretly rescue him later. Before Reuben could carry out his plan, Judah suggested an alternative, selling Joseph to passing Ishmaelite merchants for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was sold and taken to Egypt. To cover up their crime, the brothers dipped Joseph's special robe in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, allowing him to conclude that his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, where he initially prospered. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he became a successful man. This prosperity led Potiphar to appoint Joseph as the overseer of his entire household. Joseph's fortunes took a turn when Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce him. He consistently resisted, declaring, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" When rejected, she falsely accused him of attempted rape, resulting in his imprisonment. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, who put him in charge of the other prisoners. There, Joseph interpreted the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. When his interpretations came true, Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him before Pharaoh. However, the chief cupbearer forgot him. 2 years later, when Pharaoh had troubling dreams that none of his magicians could interpret, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. Brought out of prison, Joseph told Pharaoh, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." He then interpreted the dreams as predicting 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine, and recommended that Pharaoh appoint someone to oversee the storage of grain during the plentiful years. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him to this exact position. At the age of 30, Joseph was transformed from a prisoner into the prime minister of Egypt, receiving Pharaoh's signet ring, fine garments, a gold necklace, an official chariot, and an Egyptian name. He was also given a wife from the aristocracy, who bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. As Joseph had predicted, 7 years of great abundance were followed by a devastating famine that extended far beyond Egypt. When scarcity reached Canaan, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping only Benjamin, Rachel's other son, at home. In Egypt, the brothers did not recognize Joseph, who now appeared entirely Egyptian in both appearance and position. But he recognized them without revealing his identity. Joseph tested them by accusing them of being spies and demanding that they bring their youngest brother as proof of their honesty. He kept Simeon as a hostage and secretly returned their money in their grain sacks. When the famine persisted, Jacob reluctantly allowed Benjamin to accompany his brothers to Egypt, with Judah offering himself as a guarantee for his safety. On their second visit, Joseph hosted his brothers for a meal, becoming emotional upon seeing Benjamin. As a final test, Joseph ordered that his silver cup be hidden in Benjamin's sack and then sent guards to discover the supposed theft. When Benjamin was seemingly caught stealing, Judah offered to stay as a slave in his place, explaining that losing another son of Rachel would surely kill their elderly father. This act of self-sacrifice demonstrated a transformation in the brothers' character, particularly in Judah, who years earlier had suggested selling Joseph. Moved by this development, Joseph finally revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." Facing his brother's shock and fear, he offered forgiveness and a providential interpretation of events. "Do not be distressed for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph then invited his entire family to live in Egypt under his protection for the remaining 5 years of famine. With Pharaoh's blessing, Jacob and his whole household, 70 people, migrated to Egypt and settled in the fertile region of Goshen. Jacob's reunion with his long-lost son was deeply emotional. "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face, and you are still alive." The patriarch lived another 17 years in Egypt before passing away. Before his death, he blessed all his sons, especially Joseph's 2 sons, incorporating them as full-fledged tribes of Israel. Jacob made Joseph promise to bury him not in Egypt, but in the family cave at Machpelah in Canaan. This promise, fulfilled with a massive funeral procession, underscored the conviction that despite their prosperity in Egypt, the true land of Israel was in Canaan according to God's divine promise. Years later, when Joseph was also near death, he expressed the same conviction: "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." He then made his relatives swear that when God delivered them, they would carry his bones back to Canaan, an act of faith in God's promises that would be fulfilled centuries later during the Exodus. Thus, the narrative of the patriarchs ends with Israel, the family, temporarily displaced from Israel, the land. Yet, with the firm conviction that God's promises remained valid and would one day be fully realized. Underscore 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 underscore. The descendants of Jacob prospered tremendously in Egypt. Exodus 1 verse 7 records, "The Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them." This extraordinary rate of growth fulfilled God's promise to make Abraham into a great nation. However, this prosperity triggered a hostile reaction. A new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. This Pharaoh, with no memory of Joseph's service, saw only a growing threat in the expanding Israelite population. His strategy was calculated oppression, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. When this tactic failed, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Pharaoh adopted extreme measures. First, he ordered Hebrew midwives to secretly kill all newborn boys. When they disobeyed, Pharaoh issued a public decree: every boy that is born, you must throw into the river. It was in this context of genocide that Moses was born. His mother hid him for 3 months, and when hiding him was no longer possible, she devised a desperate plan. She placed him in a papyrus basket coated with tar and pitch and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Providentially, Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and decided to save him. The child's sister, Miriam, suggested a Hebrew nurse, his own mother. Thus, his mother was paid to nurse her own son, who would later be raised by Pharaoh's daughter. The princess named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Moses grew up with extraordinary privileges, receiving an Egyptian education while retaining his Hebrew identity. At the age of 40, this internal conflict dramatically surfaced when Moses killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. When his act was discovered, he fled to Midian, where he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, and spent the next 40 years as a shepherd, a silent preparation for leading the people of Israel. After 4 decades in the wilderness, Moses' life followed an established pattern until an extraordinary encounter. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. As Moses approached, God called him by name and demanded reverence: "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." The divine message was direct: "I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Therefore, I have come down to deliver them." Then came Moses calling, "Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out." Moses was reluctant, raising several objections. When he asked for God's name, he received a profound response: "I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you." This name conveys self-existence and immutability. Even after this revelation, Moses continued to resist until God appointed Aaron, his brother, as his spokesperson. Upon returning to Egypt, Moses and Aaron gathered the elders of Israel, performed the divine signs, and delivered the message of deliverance. The people believed. However, the initial confrontation with Pharaoh had devastating results. To the demand, "Let my people go," Pharaoh responded with contempt, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." He imposed harsher labor conditions, requiring the same brick production without providing straw. This worsening oppression led the people to turn against Moses, who in turn cried out to God in anguish. The deliverer was learning that redemption would not come easily and that even those being freed would respond with doubt. God answered Moses' plea with reassurance: "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go." The first plague came after Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites. Moses struck the waters of the Nile with his staff, and all the water in the river was turned to blood. This judgment targeted the Nile, which the Egyptians regarded as divine. When Pharaoh remained stubborn, a second plague followed. Frogs emerged from the Nile and overran Egypt. This plague struck Heqet, the Egyptian goddess of fertility. Pharaoh begged for relief, promising to free Israel, but changed his mind once the plague ended. The third plague, lice, came without warning. Pharaoh's magicians, who had previously replicated the signs, now failed and admitted, "This is the finger of God." The fourth plague, swarms of flies, introduced an important distinction: "I will make a difference between my people and your people." The subsequent plagues would not affect the Israelites in Goshen. The fifth plague brought a deadly pestilence upon Egyptian livestock, directly impacting the Egyptian deities associated with animals. The sixth plague caused boils that broke out in sores on both man and beast. The seventh plague, hail mixed with fire, was preceded by a warning to shelter people and animals. Some Egyptians feared the word of the Lord and took precautions, others ignored the warning and suffered heavy losses. The eighth plague, locusts, devoured all remaining vegetation. Even Pharaoh's own servants pleaded for the Israelites' release. The 9th plague brought thick darkness for 3 days, a direct attack on Ra, the Egyptian sun god. When Pharaoh still refused to let the people go completely, the final plague was announced, the death of all firstborn in Egypt. This plague would be a judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Preparations for this plague introduced the Passover, a lamb for each household, its blood applied to the doorposts, and its meat eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. The blood was crucial. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. At midnight, judgment struck as foretold. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not one dead. Finally defeated, Pharaoh commanded, "Rise, go out from among my people." The Israelites departed Egypt in haste. As instructed, they asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing, and the Egyptians gave them what they requested, plunder representing compensation for centuries of forced labor. The exodus involved an enormous number of people, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. Including women and children, the total population likely exceeded 2 million. From the very beginning, God guided their journey. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. This visible manifestation of the divine presence provided constant direction. Surprisingly, God did not lead them by the shortest route, but instead took them along a path that left them trapped between the sea and the pursuing Egyptian forces. Shortly after the Israelites' departure, Pharaoh mobilized his army to recapture them. Seeing the Egyptians approaching, the Israelites panicked. "Were there no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" Moses responded with faith, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you." What followed is one of the most dramatic divine interventions ever recorded. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued Israel into the dry seabed, but God threw the Egyptian army into confusion. Once Israel had safely crossed, the waters returned, covering the chariots and horsemen of Pharaoh's entire army. This decisive victory demonstrated God's absolute power. Israel saw the great work that the Lord had done against the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed. In response, Moses and the Israelites sang a song of celebration, and Miriam led the women with tambourines and dancing. This miraculous crossing became the defining event in Israel's national memory, repeatedly referenced as the ultimate demonstration of God's redeeming power. The euphoria of victory soon gave way to the practical challenges of life in the wilderness. Just 3 days after the crossing, they faced their first crisis at Marah, where the water was bitter. The people turned against Moses, who cried out to God. Instructed to throw a piece of wood into the water, Moses made it drinkable. This first test established a pattern: crisis, complaint, divine intervention, and spiritual lesson. Soon they faced another crisis when their supplies from Egypt ran out, leading to more complaints. God responded with 2 forms of provision: quail in the evening and manna in the morning. The manna, small round flakes like frost on the ground, came with specific instructions. They were to gather only enough for each day, except on the 6th day when they were to collect a double portion for the Sabbath. These rules taught daily dependence on God and the observance of the Sabbath. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they reached the inhabited land. At Rephidim, they faced another water crisis. God instructed Moses to strike a rock with his staff, and water flowed abundantly. Also at Rephidim, they encountered their first military challenge when the Amalekites attacked. During the battle led by Joshua, Moses had to keep his hands raised for Israel to prevail. When he grew tired, Aaron and Hur supported his hands until sunset, ensuring victory. Before reaching Sinai, Israel received a visit from Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who offered wise administrative advice. Seeing Moses overwhelmed by judging the people's disputes, Jethro suggested delegating authority to judges over groups of varying sizes. Moses implemented this system, allowing for more efficient governance during their wilderness journey. In the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and camped before the mountain. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, establishing the foundation for his covenant proposal, not based on Israel's merits, but on God's grace and power demonstrated in their deliverance from Egypt. The divine proposal followed. Now, if you will diligently listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my treasured possession among all peoples. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This offer presented a special relationship with a dual purpose. Israel would be both God's treasured possession, exclusive relationship, and a kingdom of priests, a mediating role between God and the nations. The people's response was unanimous. Everything the Lord has spoken, we will do. This immediate acceptance, though sincere at the moment, would be tested repeatedly in the days and years to come. From this dramatic setting, God delivered the 10 Commandments, which would form the core of the covenant. The Decalogue begins with a historical prologue. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This crucial introduction establishes that the commandments are not arbitrary demands, but a fitting response to a God who has already demonstrated grace and deliverance. Obedience was to be motivated by gratitude, not merely fear. The commandments can be divided into 2 main categories. The first 4 regulate the relationship with God, while the last 6 govern human relationships. The first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. In the context of prevailing polytheism, this requirement of exclusive worship was revolutionary. Eventually, this exclusivity would evolve into full monotheism, the assertion that other gods simply do not exist. The second commandment, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. This prohibition radically distinguished Israel from neighboring cultures where idols and divine representations were central to worship. The third commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Beyond forbidding perjury and blasphemy, this commandment demanded reverence for God's character and reputation. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. This weekly rest had multiple dimensions. It commemorated creation, reminded the people of their deliverance from slavery, provided necessary physical rest, and established a balanced rhythm between work and worship. The fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. As the only commandment with a specific promise, this obligation established a family order that underpinned the entire social structure. The sixth commandment, you shall not murder. This prohibition against unlawful killing was based on the unique value of human life as bearing the divine image. The seventh commandment, you shall not commit adultery. This commandment safeguarded the institution of marriage, essential for family and social stability. The eighth commandment, you shall not steal. Recognizing the right to private property, this prohibition laid the foundation for fair economic relationships and respect for personal boundaries. The ninth commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Although its immediate context is judicial, the principle extends to all honest communication. The 10th commandment, you shall not covet. Going beyond external actions, this commandment reaches motivations and attitudes, acknowledging that disordered desires are the root of behavioral violations. These fundamental principles were unique among ancient legal codes for their brevity, simplicity, and concern for inner motives. They provided a moral framework that would be elaborated into hundreds of specific laws and later summarized by Jesus in the dual commandment to love God and neighbor. After the presentation of the Decalogue, Moses received additional laws that applied the core principles to specific situations. This expanded set of regulations, known as the Book of the Covenant, covered civil, criminal, and ceremonial laws. The civil laws regulated aspects such as slavery, with humanitarian protections uncommon for the time, liability for damages, loans, and the treatment of foreigners, widows, and orphans. Criminal laws established punishments for various offenses, incorporating the principle of proportional retribution, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Far from promoting vengeance, this principle actually limited excessive retaliation, ensuring that punishment did not exceed the crime. Ceremonial laws covered worship, festivals, first fruits, and tithes. After receiving these laws, Moses led a solemn ceremony to formally ratify the covenant. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, built an altar at the base of the mountain, and 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, saying, "Here is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you according to all these words." Following this ratification, an extraordinary covenant meal took place. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. They ate and drank, table fellowship that symbolized peace and acceptance, visually confirming the restored relationship between God and Israel's representatives. Moses' prolonged absence on the mountain created anxiety among the people. When the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Get up, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." This impatience revealed how superficially Israel had understood the first and second commandments, which they had received just weeks earlier. Their demand for visible gods showed an attachment to Egyptian religious patterns and a fear of apparent abandonment by their leader. Surprisingly, Aaron gave in easily. He took the gold from the people, made it into a cast calf, and proclaimed, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." This made the transgression more subtle. It was not a complete rejection of Yahweh for other deities, but an attempt to worship Yahweh through forbidden images, possibly following Egyptian models like the Apis bull. God's response was immediate and severe. He informed Moses, "Your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have made for themselves a cast calf and have worshipped it." Notably, God referred to Israel as your people rather than my people, signaling a rupture in the covenant relationship. God proposed total destruction and a fresh start through Moses. "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." This proposal tested Moses' character and offered him a status comparable to Abraham. Moses' response demonstrated true intercessory leadership. He appealed to three considerations: God's reputation among the nations, what will the Egyptians say, the promises made to the patriarchs, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and God's gracious character. The result, then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. As Moses descended the mountain and personally witnessed the idolatry, he expressed righteous anger by breaking the tablets of the law, a symbolic act indicating that Israel had broken the newly established covenant. He destroyed the golden calf, ground it into powder, mixed it with water, and made the Israelites drink it, demonstrating the idol's futility. When confronted, Aaron gave a weak excuse, suggesting that the calf had emerged almost spontaneously. "I threw the gold into the fire, and out came this calf." His evasion of responsibility stood in stark contrast to Moses' decisive leadership. Judgment followed. Moses asked, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." The tribe of Levi rallied to him and executed about 3,000 men, likely the chief instigators of the idolatry. This severe action established a precedent. Violations of the covenant would have grave consequences. Moses then returned to the mountain, offering himself as a substitute. "This people has committed a great sin. But if not, forgive them, please erase me from the book you have written." God rejected this offer, maintaining the principle of individual responsibility, but agreed to uphold the covenant, though with lasting consequences. This traumatic episode taught enduring lessons: how easily God's people could revert to previous cultural patterns, the danger of creating physical representations of divinity, the seriousness of the covenant, and the importance of faithful leadership in times of spiritual crisis. Following the golden calf crisis, God renewed the covenant and provided extensive details for the construction of the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where he would dwell among his people. "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." This elaborate project included a large outer courtyard containing a rectangular tent divided into two spaces, the holy place and the most holy place. The most holy place contained only the Ark of the Covenant, a gold-covered chest holding the tablets of the law, a jar of manna, and later Aaron's staff that budded. Above the ark was the atonement cover, where the blood of atonement would be sprinkled annually. The holy place contained three items: the altar of incense, symbolizing prayers rising to God, the table of showbread, representing divine provision and fellowship, and the seven-branched lampstand, providing light and symbolizing spiritual illumination. The outer courtyard contained the bronze basin for ritual purification and the altar of burnt offerings for sacrifices. The entire complex used precious materials arranged in a decreasing pattern of value as one moved away from the most holy place, symbolizing the gradual approach to God's presence. These materials were to come from voluntary offerings. The response was extraordinary. The contributions were so generous that the people had to be told to stop bringing materials for the construction. God appointed specific artisans, filling them with the Spirit of God for artistic and technical work. This is the first biblical account of someone being filled with the Spirit, notably for artistic work rather than just prophecy or leadership. When the tabernacle was completed exactly 1 year after the Exodus, divine glory visibly descended, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. This tangible manifestation confirmed God's acceptance of the work and provided ongoing evidence of His presence among His people. The tabernacle would serve as the center of Israelite worship for centuries until it was replaced by Solomon's permanent temple. More importantly, it established theological patterns that permeate the entire Bible: the tension between transcendence and immanence, the problem of human sin preventing direct access to God, the need for sacrificial mediation to restore communion, and God's desire to dwell among His people, a theme that would culminate in the incarnation of Christ. After spending nearly a year at the base of Mount Sinai, the Israelites needed to organize for their journey to the Promised Land. God commanded a detailed census of the population, counting those 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the army of Israel. This census served both military preparation and community organization. The Levites, set apart for religious service, were counted separately. They were consecrated to replace the firstborn of the other tribes in sacred service. The camp was arranged in an orderly pattern with the tabernacle at the center. 3 tribes camped on each side of the tabernacle, with the banners of Judah, east, Reuben, south, Ephraim, west, and Dan, north, serving as the primary markers. This arrangement conveyed important theological truths. God literally dwelled at the center of the community. The movement of the camp was supernaturally guided. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, they encamped. It didn't take long for complaints to replace obedience. The people complained about their hardships, and fire from the Lord burned among them. This event gave the place the name Taberah, burning, and established a pattern that would repeat frequently: complaint, divine judgment, a cry to Moses, and intercession bringing relief. Soon another complaint arose, this time about food: if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. But now we have lost our appetite, we never see anything but this manna. This ingratitude revealed a deep spiritual problem, an idealized view of their past enslavement and a disregard for God's present provision. The complaint overwhelmed Moses, who expressed his own despair to God. God responded in 2 ways. First, by distributing the Spirit that was upon Moses to 70 elders to assist in leadership. Second, by promising so much meat that it would become repulsive. The meat arrived in the form of quail that were scattered all around the camp. However, while they were still eating, many were struck by a severe plague. The place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, graves of craving, marking the deadly cost of unrestrained desire. Another murmuring arose, this time from Moses' own family. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. The criticism combined ethnic prejudice with envy of his unique prophetic authority. Divine response was swift. Miriam was struck with leprosy, though after Moses' intercession, her condition was temporary. Finally, Israel reached the southern border of Canaan, Kadesh Barnea, only a few days' journey from the Promised Land. At the people's suggestion and with divine approval, 12 spies, 1 from each tribe, were sent to scout the land. After 40 days of exploring Canaan, the spies returned with evidence of the land's fertility, a cluster of grapes so large that 2 men carried it on a pole. Their report confirmed the divine promise: it truly flows with milk and honey. However, 10 of the 12 spies added a negative assessment: the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. We are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we. Only Caleb and Joshua maintained a perspective of faith: let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. The community chose to believe the pessimistic report, resulting in collective panic. The people wept that night and murmured against Moses and Aaron. They said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. This proposal represented a total rejection of both Moses' leadership and God's promise. Joshua and Caleb tried to change public opinion, but their reward for faithfulness was that the whole congregation said to stone them. The divine intervention was immediate and severe: how long will this people reject me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them. Only Moses' passionate intercession, appealing to God's reputation among the nations, prevented total destruction. Nevertheless, severe consequences remained. God swore that none of the men who had seen his glory and his signs would see the land. The specific sentence was clear: according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. The 10 pessimistic spies died immediately by plague. The Israelites, attempting to remedy their mistake, advanced against the Canaanites despite Moses' warning, and were defeated. This sealed the fate of the first generation, condemned to wander in the wilderness until all the adults responsible for the rebellion had perished. The following years witnessed increasing challenges to the established leadership. The most significant was led by Korah, a Levite, along with Dathan and Abram from the tribe of Reuben. They challenged Moses and Aaron, questioning their exclusive authority. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households. The next day, the congregation blamed Moses and Aaron for the deaths. This unjust accusation provoked another divine manifestation, a plague that began consuming the people. Under Moses' direction, Aaron ran through the camp with incense to make atonement, standing between the living and the dead until the plague stopped. To settle the priesthood matter definitively, God ordered an additional test. Each tribe was to present a staff with its name inscribed. The next day, Aaron's staff not only budded but also produced blossoms, sprouted shoots, and bore almonds. This miraculous confirmation of the Aaronic priesthood was preserved in the ark as a permanent memorial. Near the end of the wilderness journey, even Moses and Aaron failed at a critical moment. At Meribah, when the people once again complained about the lack of water, God instructed Moses to speak to the rock. Instead, Moses, exasperated, exclaimed, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" and struck the rock twice with his staff. Although water gushed out abundantly, God judged this action as a failure of trust. "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." This sentence ensured that the conquest of Canaan would be led by a new generation under new leadership. As the 40 years came to a close and Israel neared the Promised Land, they faced several final challenges. The descendants of Esau refused them passage through their territory, forcing a lengthy detour during which Aaron died. The prolonged detour increased the people's discouragement, and once again they spoke against God and against Moses. In response, the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. When the people repented, God provided an unusual remedy: make a fiery serpent and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten and looks at it will live. This bronze serpent, though later turned into an object of idolatrous worship, served as a powerful theological symbol. Jesus later referenced it as a foreshadowing of his own crucifixion. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. Approaching Canaan from the east, Israel secured significant victories over Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, establishing a presence in the Transjordan. These victories alarmed Balak, king of Moab, who hired Balaam, a renowned seer, to curse Israel. After an extraordinary episode involving a talking donkey, Balaam found it impossible to curse those whom God had blessed. Frustrated by his failed direct approach, Balaam seemingly advised a more subtle strategy: religious and moral seduction. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. This episode posed a greater threat than military opposition: compromise with foreign gods through sexual immorality. The judgment was severe: public execution of the leaders and a plague that killed 24,000 Israelites. As the wilderness journey neared its end, God commanded a second census. The total was 603,550 men fit for war, remarkably similar to the first census taken nearly 40 years earlier. However, not one of them was among those counted by Moses and Aaron, for the Lord had told them they would surely die in the wilderness. Not one was left except Caleb and Joshua. The numerical similarity concealed a complete generational replacement. Several important administrative and legal matters were resolved during this period. A significant issue arose when the daughters of Zelophehad, whose father had died without male heirs, approached Moses requesting inheritance rights. After consulting the Lord, Moses established a legal precedent ensuring both the inheritance rights of daughters and the preservation of land within the original tribes. Another crucial matter involved the request from the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh to settle in the Transjordan territory. They proposed to build sheepfolds for their livestock and cities for their little ones, while their men would be armed and ready to go before the people of Israel until they had brought them to their place. Moses accepted this proposal but issued a solemn warning about the consequences of breaking their promise. Moses also established 6 cities of refuge, 3 in the Transjordan and 3 in Canaan, where individuals who had committed unintentional manslaughter could find protection from revenge until a proper trial was conducted. Additionally, 48 cities were designated for the Levites, who would not receive a tribal land inheritance. As the death of Moses approached, the question of succession became crucial. Moses took the initiative, asking God to appoint a man over the congregation who would lead them out and bring them in. God's response was clear: "Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Present him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight." Joshua had already demonstrated leadership qualifications as Moses' assistant, a military commander, and one of the 2 faithful spies. The transfer of authority was a public and significant ceremony. Moses laid his hands on Joshua and commissioned him. The book of Deuteronomy consists mainly of Moses' final speeches delivered on the plains of Moab. The term Deuteronomy means second law, not a new set of laws, but rather a recap and application of the covenant for the new generation about to enter the promised land. The first speech begins with a historical review of the journey from Sinai, emphasizing both divine care and Israel's failures. This honest summary served 2 purposes: to teach the new generation through the mistakes of their ancestors and to emphasize that the imminent entry into Canaan was a result of divine faithfulness, not human merit. Moses then reaffirmed the foundations of the covenant, beginning with a recitation of the Decalogue. The famous Shema captures the heart of the covenant: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Moses repeatedly emphasized the need for separation from Canaanite practices and warned against the danger of prosperity leading to forgetfulness of God. He also emphasized the importance of ongoing education. "These words shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children." The second great discourse focused on the formal renewal of the covenant for the generation that would enter Canaan. This renewal addressed a critical need: the generation that had experienced the Exodus and sinned had died. Their children needed to personally affirm the covenant. A crucial component of this renewal was a detailed exposition of the blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. The curses are significantly more extensive, including a prophetic foreshadowing of future exiles. Despite these severe warnings, Moses offered hope beyond judgment. When the people returned to the Lord, He would bring them back from captivity and have compassion on them. In concluding this discourse, Moses presented a fundamental choice: "I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life." After these blessings, Moses ascended Mount Nebo as commanded by God. The Lord showed him all the land and said, "This is the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." The opportunity to behold the promised land, even without entering it, represented a significant grace. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and he buried him in a valley. But to this day no one knows the location of his grave. This mysterious burial was possibly intended to prevent the worship of his tomb, an inappropriate tribute to a man who dedicated his life to leading worship exclusively to God. Moses passed away with remarkable vigor. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor had his strength faded. This observation suggests that his death was determined by divine purpose rather than natural physical decline. The true measure of Moses' greatness is offered in the divine epitaph: "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and wonders and in all the mighty power and all the great and terrible deeds which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel." This uniqueness would be recognized throughout Jewish history, with Moses remaining unparalleled until the coming of the promised prophet like Moses. The transition to Joshua was seamless. Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the children of Israel listened to him. Moses' death marked the end of Israel's formative era. Under his leadership, a mass of fugitive slaves had become a cohesive nation with an identity, laws, a religious system, and a divine purpose. Although Moses did not witness the conquest of Canaan, his legacy enabled Israel to step into that future. Underscore 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 underscore. With Moses' death, Joshua assumed leadership over Israel, receiving a renewed commission directly from God. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause these people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may be careful to do according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Joshua immediately began practical preparations, commanding the people to prepare provisions, for within 3 days they were to cross the Jordan to take possession of the land. A strategic step was to send 2 spies to Jericho, the first fortified city they would face. These men found refuge in the house of Rahab, a prostitute who surprisingly expressed faith in the God of Israel. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. This declaration of faith led to a pact of mutual protection. The crossing of the Jordan River, then at flood stage, demonstrated continuity with Moses' leadership through another water-related miracle. As the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, the waters flowing from upstream stood still and rose up in a heap. This miraculous event left a deep impression on both the Israelites and the Canaanites. To memorialize this crossing, Joshua instructed 12 men, 1 from each tribe, to take stones from the dry riverbed and place them in Gilgal as a perpetual monument, that this may be a sign among you. And when your children ask in time to come, then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. At Gilgal, Joshua renewed the covenant through 2 fundamental rituals. First, he circumcised all the men born in the wilderness, as this sign of the covenant had been neglected during the journey. Second, they celebrated Passover. Symbolically, these actions declared that Israel was entering the promised land as a covenant people, carrying the traditions and commitments established since the Exodus. As he approached Jericho, Joshua had a supernatural encounter with a man standing with a drawn sword, the commander of the army of the Lord. This mysterious figure delivered an unusual strategy for conquering Jericho: march around the city once for 6 days, and on the 7th day, march around it 7 times. The priests were to blow trumpets, and the people were to shout with a great shout. This unconventional military tactic emphasized that victory would come by divine power, not human strategy. After following these instructions, the walls collapsed, and the people charged straight in and took the city. The city was completely destroyed except for Rahab and her family as promised. The next battle against the city of Ai resulted in an unexpected Israelite defeat. The revealed cause was disobedience to divine instructions. Achan had secretly taken forbidden items from Jericho's spoils. Israel has sinned. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. After identifying and punishing the transgressor, Joshua implemented a conventional military strategy against Ai using an ambush. The resulting victory restored Israelite confidence and established an important lesson: success depended as much on spiritual obedience as on proper tactical planning. Israel's initial victories alarmed the inhabitants of Canaan. While some prepared for military resistance, the people of Gibeon chose a different strategy. They resorted to a ruse, pretending to come from a distant land, and secured a peace treaty with Israel. This decision was made hastily. The Israelites did not inquire of the Lord. When the deception was discovered 3 days later, the treaty was upheld out of respect for the oath. The Gibeonites were reduced to woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly and for the altar of the Lord. The Gibeonite alliance provoked a significant military reaction. 5 Amorite kings formed a coalition against Gibeon, whose inhabitants appealed to Joshua for help. A rapid Israelite response caught the enemy by surprise. During this battle, one of the most extraordinary events of the conquest occurred. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. This supernatural extension of daylight allowed for a complete victory, demonstrating divine control over cosmic forces. Later, a larger coalition led by Jabin, king of Hazor, mobilized against Israel in the north. Facing this formidable challenge, God reassured Joshua, and the decisive victory at the waters of Merom eliminated the main organized resistance in Canaan. After the major military campaigns, even though many areas remained unconquered, the time had come to distribute the land. The territorial distribution included both conquered and still unoccupied areas, demonstrating faith that God's promise of complete possession would eventually be fulfilled. Before the general distribution, Caleb received a special portion. At 85 years old, he still demonstrated confidence to face the dreaded Anakites. "Give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. The Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." After establishing tribal boundaries, Joshua implemented justice structures as ordered by Moses. 6 cities of refuge were designated so that anyone who killed a person accidentally and unintentionally could flee there and find protection. Additionally, 48 cities were allocated to the Levites, distributed among all the tribes for uniform spiritual instruction throughout the territory. As he neared the end of his life, Joshua summoned all Israel for a final address. He emphasized the fundamental principle of the covenant: divine faithfulness requires corresponding human faithfulness. In a second gathering at Shechem, a historically significant site where Abraham had received the divine promise, Joshua led a covenant renewal ceremony. He began by recounting sacred history from Terah, Abraham's father, to the present conquest, demonstrating the consistency of God's redemptive purpose throughout generations. This culminated in a direct challenge: "Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The response was a unanimous affirmation: "We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." Joshua formalized this renewed commitment, writing these words in the book of the law of God. Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. His burial marked the end of an era. During this same period, the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, fulfilling a centuries-old promise and symbolically completing the Exodus journey. The narrative concludes on a positive note: Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. However, this spiritual stability would not last beyond that generation. After Joshua's death and the passing of the generation that had witnessed the conquest, Israel entered a period of instability. A key factor was the incomplete conquest. They did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in various territories. This situation created a spiritual challenge. Another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord nor the works he had done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. The primary spiritual threat came from the Canaanite fertility cult centered around Baal, the storm and fertility god, and Ashtoreth, the fertility goddess. These cults promised agricultural prosperity through rituals that often included sexual practices. For Israelite farmers struggling to survive in a new land, such religion had strong practical appeal. The result was religious syncretism, the blending of Yahweh worship with pagan practices. Politically, Israel lacked centralized leadership. The tribes functioned as a loose confederation, united by common ancestry and religious alliances, but without a permanent central government or national army. This leadership vacuum left Israel vulnerable both to cultural influences and military aggressions from neighboring peoples. When crisis arose, charismatic leaders, the judges, emerged temporarily to respond to specific threats, but their impact rarely extended beyond their immediate region or lasted beyond their lifetime. The narrative structure of the book of Judges follows a recurring cycle. Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord delivered them into the hands of their enemies, they cried out to the Lord raised up judges for them, the land had rest. After each judge's death, the cycle restarted, usually with increasing moral deterioration. The book of Judges presents 12 deliverers, with detailed narratives for 6 key figures. Othniel set the standard. Under his leadership, Israel defeated Cushan-Rishathaim of Mesopotamia, securing 40 years of peace. Ehud employed an unusual strategy against Eglon, king of Moab, who had oppressed Israel for 18 years. Being left-handed, an uncommon trait that made him unexpectedly dangerous, he used this advantage to assassinate the king. This bold action inspired Israel to defeat Moab, resulting in 80 years of peace. Deborah was the only female judge. She led Israel against Jabin of Hazor and his commander Sisera. Her leadership combined judicial authority with prophetic inspiration. Victory came through divine intervention and the unexpected contribution of another woman, Jael, who drove a tent peg through Sisera's temple while he slept in exhaustion. Gideon received a divine call while secretly threshing wheat in a winepress to hide from the Midianites. After divine confirmation through miraculous signs, Gideon assembled an army against the Midianites. Surprisingly, God reduced his forces from 32,000 to just 300 men, so that Israel may not boast against me, saying, "My own hand has saved me." This small force, using psychological tactics with torches hidden in pitchers, defeated the Midianites, leading to 40 years of peace. Unfortunately, Gideon later created an idol that became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Jephthah emerged from adverse circumstances as the son of a prostitute, rejected by his half-brothers. When the Ammonites threatened Israel, the elders of Gilead turned to Jephthah due to his military reputation. His leadership was marked by an imprudent vow that resulted in a personal tragedy when his only daughter was the first to meet him after his victory. Samson embodies the contradictions of the period. Consecrated to God from birth as a Nazirite, he possessed supernatural strength but significant moral weakness, especially his attraction to Philistine women. After a series of confrontations with the Philistines driven more by personal vengeance than national zeal, Samson was captured when Delilah discovered the secret of his strength. With his eyes gouged out and reduced to entertainment for his enemies, Samson ultimately fulfilled his purpose in a sacrificial death, thus he killed more in his death than he had killed in his life. These judges demonstrate a consistent pattern, God working through imperfect instruments to deliver his people. The emphasis on human weakness underscores that the true source of deliverance was God, not the leader's abilities. The final chapters of Judges present disturbing narratives illustrating Israel's moral and religious decline. These stories do not follow the chronological sequence of the rest of the book but serve as a thematic epilogue, demonstrating the consequences of religious and social anarchy. The first episode involves Micah, a man who established a private sanctuary with a silver idol in his home. He hired a Levite as a personal priest, blending Yahwistic worship with idolatrous practices. This privatized religious syncretism represented a complete corruption of the centralized worship system prescribed by the law. The situation worsened when warriors from the tribe of Dan, seeking to expand their territory, stole Micah's idols and abducted his priest. They established a tribal idolatrous sanctuary that would persist for generations. The second narrative describes a horrific crime in Gibeah of Benjamin. A Levite traveling with his concubine sought lodging in Gibeah, where men of the city demanded to sexually abuse him. When his concubine was handed over in his place and died as a result of the abuse, the Levite divided her body into 12 pieces and sent them to the tribes. This atrocity triggered a civil war. When Benjamin refused to hand over the guilty men for justice, the other tribes nearly exterminated Benjamin. These final narratives illustrate how, in the absence of centralized leadership and commitment to the covenant, Israel had descended to a moral level comparable to or even worse than the Canaanites they were supposed to replace. The repeated refrain, "In those days there was no king in Israel," suggests that monarchy, though not part of the original divine design, became necessary due to moral and spiritual anarchy. The transition from the era of the judges to the monarchy is narrated through the life of Samuel, a figure who combined the roles of prophet, priest, and judge. His story begins with the fervent prayer of his mother Hannah, who vowed to dedicate him to divine service if she were granted a son. Born in response to this prayer, Samuel was brought to the tabernacle in Shiloh once he was weaned. There he grew up under the care of the priest Eli, in stark contrast to Eli's own corrupt sons. Samuel's prophetic calling came in his childhood. When God called Samuel during the night, the boy initially mistook the voice for Eli until the priest recognized the divine nature of the call. Samuel's first prophetic message was a judgment against Eli's house, establishing him as an authentic prophet. The prophesied judgment was fulfilled when Israel was defeated by the Philistines, the Ark of the Covenant was captured, and Eli's sons died in battle. Upon hearing the news, Eli fell backward, broke his neck, and died. This national tragedy marked the end of priestly leadership in Shiloh and set the stage for Samuel's multifaceted ministry. Samuel led a spiritual renewal, calling the people to put away foreign gods and prepare their hearts for the Lord. In response, the people removed their idols and gathered at Mizpah for public confession. During this assembly, the Philistines attacked, but they were defeated by divine intervention. Samuel commemorated this victory by raising a memorial stone called Ebenezer, stone of help, declaring, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." Under his leadership, Israel recovered its cities and peace was established. Samuel judged Israel traveling annually in a circuit while maintaining his residence in Ramah. In his old age, he appointed his sons as judges, but they did not walk in his ways, taking bribes and perverting justice. This failure created an opportunity for constitutional change. The elders of Israel approached Samuel, saying, "Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Though distressed by the request, Samuel received divine instruction to grant their demand, warning them of the consequences of centralized power, conscription, forced labor, heavy taxation, and eventual loss of freedom. Despite this warning, the people insisted, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations." This demand revealed a deeper desire for conformity with neighboring cultures, the very problem that had caused cycles of apostasy during the period of the judges. God directed Samuel to a young Benjaminite named Saul, a handsome young man taller than any of the people. Samuel privately anointed Saul as prince over Israel, confirming the anointing through predicted signs and later publicly ratifying it through sacred casting of lots at Mizpah. Saul's reign began promisingly when messengers from Jabesh-Gilead reported an Ammonite threat. The Spirit of God rushed upon Saul, and he summoned all Israel, resulting in a victory that cemented his leadership. Unfortunately, Saul soon displayed character flaws. At Gilgal, impatient with Samuel's delay, he offered the burnt offering himself, a priestly duty. Samuel rebuked him, "You have done foolishly. The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue." Another revealing episode occurred after victory over the Amalekites. Commanded to destroy the enemy completely, Saul spared King Agag and the best of the sheep and oxen. When confronted, he made excuses, "I feared the people and obeyed their voice." His failure to exercise courageous leadership led to divine rejection. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." Samuel secretly anointed David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, as the future king. David's fame grew dramatically with his victory over Goliath, which provoked Saul's jealousy. A deep friendship developed between David and Saul's son Jonathan. As Saul's attempts to kill David intensified, David fled, beginning years of persecution. Twice, David spared Saul's life, showing respect for divine authority. "The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed." Saul and Jonathan eventually died in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. David deeply mourned, "How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle." He was then anointed king initially only over Judah in Hebron. For 7 years, David ruled Judah while Saul's surviving son ruled northern Israel. Civil war persisted until both were assassinated, allowing unification. David established Jerusalem as his capital after conquering it from the Jebusites, strategically located between northern and southern territories. He also brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, centralizing religious worship. When David sought to build a permanent temple, he instead received a greater promise through the prophet Nathan, "I will raise up your offspring after you, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." This Davidic covenant would become foundational to future messianic hope. Despite his successes, David committed a grave sin with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. To cover up the adultery, he ordered Uriah's death. The prophet Nathan confronted David with a parable, and David confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord." He was forgiven, but consequences followed: the death of the child conceived in sin, domestic violence, and rebellion. David's later years were marked by family tragedies, including the rape of Tamar by Amnon, Amnon's murder by Absalom, and Absalom's rebellion and eventual death. Despite these hardships, David maintained the kingdom's unity, ensured Solomon's succession, and laid the foundations for Israel's golden age. Solomon's succession was turbulent, but intervention by Nathan and Bathsheba secured his coronation. At the beginning of his reign, Solomon received an extraordinary divine offer: "Ask what you wish me to give you." His response demonstrated humility: "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." Pleased with his request, God granted him unparalleled wisdom along with wealth and honor. This wisdom was famously displayed in the judgment of two women who both claimed to be the mother of the same baby by proposing to divide the child with a sword. Solomon identified the true mother by her willingness to give up the baby to save his life. Solomon's most significant project was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. After 7 years, the magnificent structure was completed, furnished with sacred items. At its dedication, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Solomon prayed eloquently, acknowledging the insufficiency of a physical temple. Even the heavens cannot contain you. How much less this house I have built. Ironically, Solomon's prosperity contributed to spiritual decline. He accumulated 700 wives and 300 concubines, many through political alliances. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and he built altars for foreign deities. This apostasy led to divine judgment. I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Underscore 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 underscore. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam faced an immediate crisis when the northern tribes demanded tax relief. Rejecting the advice of experienced elders, Rehoboam followed the counsel of young advisors and responded harshly. This arrogance triggered a national rupture. The 10 northern tribes formed a separate kingdom called Israel under Jeroboam, while Rehoboam controlled only Judah and Benjamin, forming the southern kingdom of Judah. This political division soon became a religious schism when Jeroboam established alternative worship centers in Dan, far north, and Bethel, southern border. He made golden calves and proclaimed, "Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." This violated the second commandment and competed with the centralized worship in Jerusalem. Jeroboam also instituted a non-Levitical priesthood and alternative festivals. This religious innovation established a pattern of apostasy that would define the history of the northern kingdom. All the northern rulers receive a standard negative assessment: he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. The situation worsened under Ahab, who, influenced by his Phoenician wife Jezebel, introduced Baal worship as the official religion and persecuted the prophets of Yahweh. During his reign, Elijah confronted Ahab, declaring a drought that lasted 3.5 years. The dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel between Elijah and the prophets of Baal resulted in the people proclaiming, "The Lord, He is God." The northern kingdom experienced chronic political instability with 9 different dynasties and 19 kings over approximately 210 years. The prophets persistently warned against the imminent national collapse. Amos proclaimed, "Behold, the days are coming, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." Hosea used a marital metaphor: "She will chase after her lovers but not catch them. Then she will say, I will go back to my first husband." The collapse came gradually. Initial Assyrian victories were followed by the final destruction under Hoshea, the last king of Israel. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invaded the whole land, came to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported Israel to Assyria. The biblical assessment is unequivocal about the causes of this disaster. This happened because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord, and did secretly things against the Lord. After the conquest, the Assyrians implemented a population transfer policy, bringing people from Babylon to settle in the towns of Samaria. This mixed population developed religious syncretism. They feared the Lord but also served their own gods. Their descendants would become the Samaritans, a distinct group in the New Testament period. The kingdom of Judah, maintaining the Davidic dynasty, experienced greater political stability than Israel, persisting for approximately 135 years after Samaria's fall. While all the kings of Israel are condemned, several Judean rulers receive a positive evaluation: he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Periods of spiritual reform alternated with deep apostasy. Asa removed the male shrine prostitutes and got rid of all the idols. His son Jehoshaphat continued the reforms, sending officials to teach the book of the law in the towns of Judah. King Hezekiah implemented comprehensive reform, removing the high places and breaking down the pillars. During his reign, the kingdom survived an Assyrian siege through divine intervention when the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. In stark contrast, Hezekiah's son Manasseh led an unprecedented apostasy. He rebuilt the high places, erected altars to Baal, worshipped the host of heaven, and even made his son pass through the fire. Moreover, he shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end. Although he eventually repented after a temporary captivity in Babylon, the spiritual damage was extensive. Josiah led a final notable reform after the discovery of the Book of the Law during the temple's renovation. He made a covenant before the Lord to follow him and keep his commandments, purified the temple, destroyed pagan sanctuaries, and prepared toward the celebration of Passover. Despite these periodic reforms, Judah followed a trajectory similar to Israel. Jeremiah lamented, "Behold, you trust in deceptive words. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe? Judgment would be inevitable, this whole land shall become a desolation and a horror, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Underscore 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 underscore. The rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar transformed the regional geopolitics. In 605 BC, the first deportation took place. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Among these captives were Daniel and his 3 friends. In 597 BC, after King Jehoiakim's rebellion, a larger second deportation occurred. Nebuchadnezzar carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and deported all of Jerusalem, the princes, the valiant men, 10,000 captives. Among this group was the prophet Ezekiel, who would receive his prophetic calling in Babylon. Jehoiakim's uncle Zedekiah was installed as a vassal king, but he eventually rebelled against Babylon. This final rebellion, against the explicit counsel of Jeremiah, led to complete destruction. Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem and besieged it. The city remained under siege until severe famine finally forced surrender. Zedekiah attempted to flee but was captured, and his sons were slaughtered before his eyes. Then they blinded Zedekiah and took him to Babylon. The city and the temple were systematically destroyed. The Babylonian army burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and tore down the walls. A third deportation removed most of the remaining population. The exiles in Babylon established communities that developed new forms of religious identity without the temple or political independence. Psalm 137 captures their nostalgia and spiritual struggle. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? The national disaster forced a deep theological reevaluation. The prophets provided a consistent interpretive framework. Exile was a direct consequence of breaking the covenant. Jeremiah explained, "Because they have forsaken my law and have not walked in it, but have followed the stubbornness of their own hearts, therefore I will scatter them among the nations." Ezekiel emphasized individual responsibility. The soul who sins shall die. Crucially, exile represented discipline, not final rejection. Isaiah assured, "For a brief moment I left you, but with great mercy I will gather you." Jeremiah offered a specific time frame. "When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will attend to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place." During the exile, new religious practices emerged to preserve identity without the temple. Circumcision, Sabbath observance, and dietary laws became distinct markers. The synagogue developed as an institution for Torah study and communal prayer. The exilic experience also brought a new understanding of suffering. Isaiah's suffering servant suggested that suffering could have a redemptive purpose. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Prophetic visions assured a future restoration more glorious than the past. Ezekiel envisioned a new temple with life-giving waters flowing from it. Jeremiah promised a new covenant written on hearts rather than stone tablets. Perhaps the most significant lesson of exile was the permanent purification from idolatry. Before captivity, Israel constantly struggled with the allure of foreign gods. After returning from Babylon, although other spiritual issues persisted, idol worship never again became a serious temptation. The legacy of exile would profoundly shape post-exilic Judaism. The community returned to the land under Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple and Jerusalem's walls. However, they would never again enjoy full political independence before modern times, remaining under a succession of empires, Persian, Greek, and Roman. Through these centuries, they tenaciously preserved their distinct religious identity, supported by the memory of exile as a warning against covenant unfaithfulness. The intertestamental period saw the rise of movements like the Pharisees and Essenes, interpreting the lessons of exile differently and applying them to contemporary circumstances. At the same time, messianic hope intensified, with many longing for the Son of Man who would establish an eternal kingdom. When John the Baptist eventually proclaimed, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand," his message resonated with hopes forged in the furnace of the Babylonian exile. Thus the fall of the kingdoms and the experience of exile, though catastrophic, served as a critical transition in the broader divine purpose of redemption. Underscore 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 underscore. We have now reached the end of this remarkable journey through the Old Testament, from creation to exile. As we have seen, this narrative is not merely a historical record of ancient events, but a living testimony of the relationship between God and humanity with all its highs and lows, promises and failures, judgments and redemptions. The story of God's people teaches us timeless lessons about faithfulness, repentance, the consequences of our choices, and above all, the unbreakable divine mercy that endures even amid our greatest failures. At every stage of this journey, whether in Eden, the Ark, Sinai, Canaan, Jerusalem, or the banks of Babylon's rivers, we see the same God persistently working to restore the broken relationship with His creation. Just as the Israelites preserved their sacred stories through generations despite exiles and hardships, we too are called to pass on this spiritual legacy. May the wisdom of Scripture continue to illuminate our path and strengthen our spiritual journey.